Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Surgent webinar, Passing the CPA Exam in 6 Months, Discipline and Time Management. My name is Paul Weiss. I am Vice President of Strategic Partnerships with Surgent. I am based out of the Philadelphia area, and I am very, very happy to be here with you this evening. I have been in the CPA exam review space for the last 20 years and the last 4 with Surgent. And once again, welcome, and we're happy to be here. I just want to make sure that we're good technology-wise before we get started. Can I get a can we get a hand raise? I just want to make sure that everybody can see my screen. Okay, so if you can see my screen, just give me a hand raise. Okay, outstanding. That sounds good. Okay, so if there's any issues at all during the presentation, you have any audio or video issues, obviously let me know, but we should be in pretty good shape, and we're excited to get started. So this is one of our most popular webinars that we do, and because it really centers around the entire exam process. So wherever you are in the exam process, there's something to be gained. So if you're just somebody new that's just beginning, you're getting ready to take your first step into this, getting ready to take your first part, whether you're already a Surgent student, or even if you're with another course and you're in the exam process, there is something to be gained tonight out of the presentation. A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are self-evident, and if you've attended a webinar before, you've probably heard a lot of these things. So they're always good to revisit. And again, if this is the first time that you're hearing this information, then again, we welcome you and we're happy that you're here. We're going to talk tonight a lot about time management, and we're also going to talk about the psychology of testing. So when you're trying to get something done like the CPA exam, which is really a test of discipline, a lot of things have to go right, and you have to be very disciplined along the way. If you're trying to do something in 6 months, which is doable, especially given the change in testing, the days that the time which you can test, which we're going to talk about, it's even more critical that you have this time management and discipline down. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about time management, and we're really going to talk about the psychology of testing, because the mental aspect of this and your mental sort of strength and well-being, and sometimes is just as important in terms of how you approach the test as it is learning and knowing the content along the way. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So the presentation tonight will be about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll allow time for a Q&A. At the end of the presentation, we will send out the slides for your review, and then we'll post the recording to our website, and we'll also email it out. So if you'd like to revisit it again or look at a particular section, and also I know there's a lot of people who aren't viewing this live who will be viewing it afterwards, you will have that recording. Also, I will share my contact information at the end of the presentation, my email and phone number. So if there's any sort of additional offline conversation that you'd like to have, as always, I'm very happy to work with you post-presentation and answer your questions. Finally, we're going to there's a lot of material, so I want to kind of get through it. But if you have questions along the way, just go ahead and put those in the chat box. And then at the end, like I said, we'll save plenty of time. Want to be, cognizant of your time, but we'll make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do with everybody is I kind of want to just give a general sort of what we're calling a COVID-19 update or Prometric update. And I'm pretty sure by now everybody has this information. So just as a quick reminder, please make sure and visit the Prometric site for the most up-to-date notifications. And I know it's been a little dicey, obviously, in the last 2 to 3 months. Believe me, we understand and we have a lot of empathy for you as test takers out there, but I do believe things are starting to sort of settle, I guess is a good way to put it. We're kind of getting back to a little bit of normalcy, so hopefully you all are seeing that too. If you have any of your exam dates scheduled or rescheduled, hopefully that you're seeing that where the normalcy comes in. At least 325 test centers or more have been open, more are expected to be open. So again, if you go to prometric.com/site openings, You can see it. It's a very detailed list of which testing centers are open near you. I also have this in spreadsheet format. I decided not to show that tonight because I think that would be extremely boring. But if anybody wants the downloaded spreadsheet of what's open by state, just let me know afterwards, and I'll be happy to send it to you. Now, the good news is the two main things I want to touch on is that most of the states have temporarily extended the dates for your notice to schedule. Now, you can go to this site, nasba.org/NTS extension/ for details on your state's extension status. Here's a map. And again, this is a little bit confusing, so hopefully everybody has got this. But again, just to make sure everybody understands, if you're one of the blue states and you have an NTS with an expiration date from April 1st to December 30th, any NTS in that range will be automatically extended to December 31st, 2020. Okay, so those are the blue states. Now, if you're in one of the yellow states and you have an NTS with an expiration date of April 1st to June 30th, those have been extended to September 30th, 2020. So a lot of the questions I've been getting recently are, well, I live in Oregon and I have an NTS that's going to expire in, on August 1st. So is that going to be extended? And as of now, the answer to that is no. So make sure that you understand the map, make sure you understand the state rules in which you live in. And again, like I said, these are available on NASBA's site, but that's a pretty good overview. So the bulk of the states have extended through December 31st, 2020. So that's good news. The other thing that's really good news is the 18-month exam credit window has been extended, as I just talked about. And then also year-round testing starts in 2 days, July 1st, 2020. So the simplest way to sum this up is that as long as you're not living in South Carolina, that state's accountancy board has decided to push year-round testing to 2021, but everyone else should be good to go starting July 1st, 2020. So year-round testing is in play. And that's really a big deal as it relates to time management. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So believe me, this webinar, which I've done before many times about how to pass in 6 months and all the things associated with planning and prepping, it got a little bit easier starting in July 1st, because essentially you're going to have 40 extra days in those two testing windows that you wouldn't normally have had. So anyway, just again to recap, things are starting to return to normal. I'm hearing more and more reports, we are as a company, that the testing dates are being secured. People have an idea now. It's more, I guess, the ability to plan is sort of back to what it was. And then obviously the new year-round testing starting July 1st is going to be helpful. Okay, so again, if you got any questions on that, again, we can chat about that afterwards as well or offline. Okay. So let's get started and let's talk about the exam, because we're going to break this up into components again of time management, discipline, and the psychology of testing. So the first thing is, this is probably something, especially if you're a recent college graduate, this is probably something you've seen 1,000 times, 10,000 times, who knows, right? And you've probably been part of a CPA exam presentation where somebody has come in and it went something like this. Okay, the exam is 4 hours per section, 16 hours total. There's 5 testlets. There's 2 testlets of multiple choice questions, 3 testlets of simulations. You can take a break. The multiple choice questions count for 50% of the weighting of the scoring. The task-based simulations count for the other 50%, except in BEC, the task-based simulations count for 35% of the scoring, and the written communications are 15%. You're going to need to study about 4 to 7 weeks per part. You're probably going to study 15 to 25 hours per week. Good luck. Has anybody heard that before? I really boiled it down quickly, but essentially, especially if you went through those in college, that's probably what you heard. And people came in and they said, great, here's what you need to know, and go become a CPA. So stop. What we need to do is we need to take a moment. We need to take a breath. And we need to really deconstruct what we are doing as it relates to planning for the CPA exam. So before you can decide that you're going to pass an exam of this type in 6 months or 8 months or whatever it is, before you do any of that, before you open a book, before you look at a lecture, anything, you really have to sit down and you have to have what we call some study program considerations. So notice we're calling a program because it's an ongoing situation. It's an ever-changing situation. It's adapting, right? So the program considerations that you have to have. Now, the things that you were told, 4 to 7 weeks per part, depending upon your requisite knowledge or which course you're taking, or 15 to 25 hours per week, those are all great and they're important, but the really important questions that you want to ask at the very beginning, and these are important, and remember I said at the beginning, a lot of this is going to sound self-evident. A lot of this is going to sound very remedial, but trust me, after working with many, many, many students over 2 decades now, I can tell you that these things are still so critical. All the things we're going to discuss tonight are the things that if you don't pay attention to and get derailed, it's going to be one of these things. So the question you should be asking is, how often are you going to study? How effective is your study time? And then what am I doing in terms of mental reparations, mental wellness, and taking care of my mental and physical well-being in the terms of a day off, right? Those are the really important things. How many hours you're going to study, you're going to need to figure that out, and how many weeks it's going to take you per part. A lot is going to be dependent upon those things below, right? Which is, how effective is your study time? It's also going to depend on which course you're taking, right? I'm going to tell right at the end, I'm going to save about 5 minutes, talk a little bit about Surgent. But how effective is your study time? That's so critical. I work with students on a coaching basis regularly, and we'll have, bi-weekly meetings set up. And what will happen is I'll go in and take a look at their statistics. I can see they haven't made a ton of progress. When we sit and sort of chat through the discussion point, it's, well, I had something at work happen. I had a life event happen. Right now, as I can imagine many of you out there with the situation related to the pandemic, children are at home, which is kind of an unexpected thing, right? So all these things are real, they happen, life happens. But the important thing is to, when you're trying to figure out when to schedule your exam and how much you can study, you really got to take into account how effective is it. That's probably the most important thing, because anybody can study, but it's sort of like that old adage of, the example is, I'm driving home, right? I don't even remember how I got here because we're on autopilot. That happens when you study too. So make sure your study time is effective, and then also make sure that you give yourself a day off here and there, at least once a week, to sort of just recalibrate and give yourself some credit for what you're doing. This is really going to sound, again, self-evident, but you've heard all those things about a positive can-do attitude, and repeating the cliches about you can do this, and keeping that outlook. But those are really, really important, and they do have a lot of value as it pertains to this part of the process, but specifically when we get into the exam itself. Okay. Now, with that said, once you kind of figure out, how's your study time going to be, where am I going to study, making sure it's effective and that sort of thing, the next question is, which part should I take first? And again, if you're already in the process, then this may be sort of a moot point. But if you're just starting out, all things being equal, we really recommend taking financial first if you can. Now, obviously, it's on demand. You can sit for whichever section you want, but there's a couple advantages to taking FAR. One is that some of the material in FAR is also tested. There's some crossover into audit and also a little bit into BEC. So there's some theory out there that if you've taken FAR and you've gotten that under your belt, it will help you in the other areas. The second thing, and probably more important, is there is a psychological component to getting through FAR first. Some people will say, well, FAR is probably the toughest. Well, it's not the toughest in terms of pass rates. The pass rates between all 4 parts are pretty much 1 and 2 on a national basis. They're within about 5 points of each other, between 48 and 54. But FAR is the most voluminous. It's the most conceptually, it's the most, the widest breadth of concepts that are tested. It's going to take you the most time to study for. And so again, psychologically kind of getting through that, people feel, it kind of gives me a leg up. I got through the quote unquote toughest part. and the other parts tend to be easier. So something to think about, again, just in terms of the way that the sequence in which you go about it. Again, all things being equal, we recommend FAR. Now, that's the first thing. Okay, so we've sort of got our study plan idea. We're going to figure out which order we're going to take these in as we're sort of putting together the 6-month map. And again, this is really, really important because you got to start off on the right foot. So just, I don't want to belabor this, but you know, if somebody tells you, a mentor or a professor or somebody or a colleague, you know, oh, take audit first, you know, audit super easy, you'll get through it. Make sure that you feel comfortable doing this, because if you're trying to get through something in 6 months and you don't get off on the right foot, trust me, it's going to derail you at the beginning. Okay. All right. Next thing, which is probably pretty self-evident, but again, I just want to hit this, is the application process. So typically during what we would consider to be, well, I don't know if we want to call it normal, we'll just call it pre-COVID, right? I would give these presentations and I would say, you know, as you're beginning to study, you want to make sure that you're doing the application process simultaneously, right? Like it's 2 lanes going parallel to each other, heading towards the same destination. It's really, really critical to stay on top of the exam, the registration process right now, because not only are you dealing with the situation at Prometric, to the boards of accountancy, with NASBA, but you're also dealing with, you know, the registrars and perhaps even the lack of personnel at your university, right? And so trying to get all those transcripts over to the particular board of accountancy, it can be difficult. So again, this isn't, I'm saying this for those people that are just starting out this process. Make sure that you are on top of the application process and make sure that that is going along smoothly, because that is critical too. Okay, and here's why. This is a review course, right? Or a review process, excuse me. Obviously it's a review course, but it's a review process. So you don't want to start studying for something too far in advance, otherwise you're not going to retain it in time to take the test. So a mistake that people make is they get started with the study process, let's say July 1, you know, looking for, I don't know, let's say an end of August first exam date. And then they find out that, you know, their transcripts aren't sent over, there was a problem with the registration process, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you got to reset your study schedule when you're part of the way into it. And again, that's going to throw you off. So again, just make sure that you're on top of the application process. Okay. Now let's take a look at the actual 6-month plan. And it's kind of interesting because I've seen you know, a variety of presentations on that. Usually people start with this at the beginning, and I don't think it's really relevant until now, because after all the other things that we've discussed, now is kind of when you could take a look at you know, when you could do this in 6 months. And again, I want to stress the year-round testing is huge. That is a really big deal because it does a couple things. Okay, and I'm going to go forward, then we'll come back to this in just a minute. The elimination of the blackout period means there's an additional 80 days available for testing within the calendar year. That's number one. And so in the scenario that we're talking about, right, which is passing 6 months by the end of the year, that's an additional 40 days that you didn't have. But here's the other thing, which is really, really huge. Up until tomorrow, right, June 30th, right, before the rules changed, if you failed a section in a particular testing window, you could not reapply to take that section that you failed until the next testing window. So what that did is it was almost beleaguering, if I can use that word, trying to figure out your schedule if for some reason you didn't pass a section, right? So let's say, you know, I took financial in January. Let's say I took it the 3rd week in January. I find out the 2nd week in February that I didn't pass. Now what do, right? Do I wait and take financial again in April? Well, it depends upon the score I got. Do I sit for the next section, right? All that was very, very difficult to plan. So I want to be clear on this. It doesn't take away from any of your focus. It doesn't make it any easier in terms of like how you want to study or prep for the exam, but it does allow for a little bit of leeway to where coming in and saying, you know, if passing all 4 parts in 6 months on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say was a 5 before, it's probably more like a 7 or 8, right? If you keep all things equal and pay attention to all the steps along the way, you can do this because in the example here on the calendar, let's say I take financial, let's say I start studying, this week, and I take financial the third week in July. Well, if for some reason I don't pass it, and there's 4 to 5 score releases per test, or per testing window for every 3 months, that is going to be, the number of score releases is going to be accelerated. It also means I don't have to wait till October to retake the part I failed. So the ability to sort of schedule it out and allow for a tiny misstep, right? I'm saying tiny, is certainly, it's a little more doable now within 6 months, right? So that's the way you want to approach it. However, and here's the most important thing, you still have to remember the 18-month rule. And I'm going to stress this because, and if any of you have heard this presentation before, I spend a lot of time really talking about the 18-month rule, because that's the number one thing that trips people up in this process, is not getting all 4 parts passed within the 18 months and then losing credit for a section that they passed and having to retake it. So not only are you up against the gun then in terms of a rolling 18-month window, but you also remember the psychology of it. You also have that psychological thing where it's I spent all this time and effort, I passed a section, and now I've lost credit for it and I have to retake it. So again, that's the number one thing is to keep in mind, the 18-month rule. So why, again, do we make such a big deal about it? Well, obviously for the aforementioned reasons that I just said in terms of the psychology of testing. But here's the other thing. I've talked to a lot of people who are getting into this process now, and they're like, oh, this is going to be much easier, right? I can do this 6 months. I can do it even in 8 months or 9 months. I have all those extra testing days now in the window. It's going to be much easier. And I'm telling you, you don't want to approach it that way. You want to approach it as strictly as you can. Do not, rely on extra testing days if you don't have to. Don't rely on, well, what am I going to do if I fail a part? All those things you plan ahead, they're insurance, but you want to focus it as if I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to stay focused and I'm going to get him done. So don't let that 18-month sneak up on you. Okay, so we have down the various things now. We have sort of how we're going to plan out things. We understand, we have an idea of which parts we're going to take. We understand the registration process, right? We're going to make sure we're on top of that. And then we're going to come in, and if I can just go back here, this is a typical good 6-month plan. So if I'm already studying in June, I would take one of my first part, sometime in July. I would take the second section towards the end of August or maybe the first part of September. And then I would try and do regulation between October and November. And then I would try and finish up with my 4th section in December. And also, here's one other thing which I want to mention just real, and we'll touch on it at the end, but allow for some flexibility in here with your exam dates, because, and some of you may know this, the testing time in May, towards the end of May, and the first 2 or 3 weeks, or excuse me, the first 10 days in June, and now what will be throughout June, those are heavily tested areas, and they're anticipating the same thing. They're anticipating still a real drive at the end of November and into December for testing dates. So keep that in mind as you go forward. All right, I'm going to take just a quick breath here, just a quick pause, and now we're going to get into some time management information as it relates to the exam. Okay, this is super critical. One of the things I think that gets overlooked, I know gets overlooked by a lot of candidates, is in the preparation process. It's how to properly prepare to actually sit and take the exam, and then how to properly study and answer the multiple choice questions and also the simulations, not so that you're just understanding the content, but to be able to do it in a very efficient and quick manner, right? So let's go back, let's bring this slide back up, because now this slide has relevance. So we talked about this remember in the very beginning. Now this means something, because you have an idea of, how much time you're gonna have to study, you have your exam date set up, and now you gotta kind of understand, okay, well, how's the format of the exam and what am I really trying to do? So, right, so what I'm really trying to do is trying to get, the exam has 99 possible points. It's not graded on a curve or a percentage. The exam has 99 points and you're trying to get 75 of those. And how am I trying to get 75 of those? I'm trying to answer as many multiple choice questions correctly, and I'm also trying to answer as many simulation parts in the whole as quickly and efficiently as I can, and I'm trying to get it done in 4 hours. So hear me on this one. Most people, it's between 94.5 to 98.5%, depending upon the section, finish the exam within the allotted 4 hours. So virtually everybody gets it done in 4 hours. But where people struggle is they don't move through the exam efficiently, and they lose valuable time either spending too much time on one or more questions and not saving enough time for simulations or a variety of time management issues within the exam, and that costs them, and they end up rushing towards the end. And I work with students where that happens, right? It's like, did you finish? Absolutely, I finished, but I didn't save enough time for the simulations. I was rushing at the end. So you want to think about this as you're going through, right? And that's why that 15-minute break is really great, because you're allotting about a minute and a half, minute 20 to a minute and 30 seconds per multiple choice question, right? And then that's going to save you enough time to do the simulation. So you get to that 15-minute break, right? And you still want it's good opportunity to sort of check and see where you're at in terms of how much time you have left. And you want to make sure, obviously, that you have enough time, as it's timed out to complete the simulations. And I'll show you some numbers in just a minute related to that. So what's one of the most effective ways to get your time up on the multiple choice questions we'll start with, and it also applies to the simulations. But the most important thing is to understand as soon as possible in the question process, what are the examiners asking? What do you really need to know? The simplest way to do that is to read what we call the stem of the question first, which is the last sentence or the last question in the example, right? And so a mistake that people make sometimes is they'll look at this and they'll read the question and they're sort of just reading through it, and then they get to the end and they say, okay, now under IFRS, what is the depreciation expense for the year ended December 31st, year one? And it's, oh, that's what I need to know, right? And so it's depreciation expense. I need to know that IFRS uses component depreciation as opposed to GAAP, but then I forgot what the question was about, right? So now I got to go back and look at it. So I always tell people, start with the stem of the question first. Very quickly figure out what they're asking and what you need to know, right? And so that's where your study habits come in, right? So not only now do you know the content, but you're going to get through this pretty quickly. This is a great example question on how to do this, okay? So we know that we're looking for component depreciation. So now I can quickly go back and do my calculations, right? It's $100 million of equipment. Two components are 80% worth, or 80 million, and they have a 20-year useful life. The last two components are 10 million each. One of them has 4 years, the other has 5 years useful life, and it's straight line depreciation. So if you do your calculations, you're going to come up with 4 million, then you're going to come up with 2.5 million and 2 million. You're going to get to 8.5 million relatively quickly. This is a great example of how to do that. And the other thing to remember is as you're studying, and this is really important, right? So you're going through, you're studying, you're learning the content, you're also practicing as you get more skilled how to answer the questions quickly. It's really important to understand, why do we focus on what's being asked? Because the examiners are really good at putting in questions where if you don't totally understand conceptually what you're being asked to do, and you get off just a little bit, you can easily get to one of these other answers. So they put in these other clever little things where if you make a mistake in the calculation, you can get to one of these other answers quickly, or easily, right? And it throws you off track. So again, practicing, you're learning the content, right? And then you're also, as you become more skilled with the content, more proficient, how do I answer the questions more quickly? Okay, a couple other things to remember too, which are very, very helpful. You're never going to leave a question blank. If you don't know a question, you're going to go ahead and guess it, right? Because it's not a negatively tested exam. We mentioned 1.5 minutes or less on each multiple choice question to save time for the simulations. The other thing you want to remember is that there are pre-test questions on the exam. So 15 to 20% of the questions are experimental. They don't count. You're not going to know which of those questions are pretest questions, so you always want to make sure and guess if you see one you don't know. But again, this is important to know, because if you're in a testing mode and you're going through and question after question after question, and all of a sudden you see 3 or 4 questions that you haven't seen before, you want to understand they might be pretest questions, because you don't want to sit there and go, oh, should I have studied these? Did I not know these? Why don't I understand this material? See what that did? That 10 seconds it took me to run through those things in my mind can very quickly get someone out of the proper testing mentality, and then you can waste time thinking about those things instead of just focusing on the task at hand and the next question. So again, all part of the psychology of testing. Now, a couple things related to task-based simulations. This is important as well. And again, for those of you who are in the exam process, I'm sure this looks very familiar, but here's what I want to just talk about briefly. And again, I'll send out the slides after this, but this is a good one to take a screenshot of. There's varying types of simulations. You can see the time allotment for each of them and kind of what to expect. And those are estimates, but they're pretty solid estimates. But why are we showing this? Because over in the right-hand column under number to expect, this kind of throws people off sometimes, right? 2 or more, 1 to 2, 1 to 2, 1 to 2. Written communications, we know there's 3. 2 of them count, 1 doesn't. You need to do all 3 because you're not sure which one doesn't count. But under the other types of simulations, this is important because some of them can take some time. And I've talked to students before who were like, well, you know what? I thought I saved enough time for the simulations. I knew I was going to be pushed. But then I got 2 exhibit heavy document review simulations back to back out of the gate, and I was kind of sunk in terms of time management. So as you're going through and you're working, right, as you get more and more towards your exam date and you're working these questions, becoming more proficient, working the simulations, make sure you're allowing plenty of time to do the simulations. Make sure you understand all the variety of simulations and what's being asked of you. That's really important. For instance, on the authoritative literature simulation, you know, one of them you're going to have is going to be a research question. Make sure you understand how to use the research button within the simulation so it's familiar to you. You don't want to be, never want to be seeing this for the first time when you're on your exam. Make sure that you understand exactly what's being asked, just as you do in the multiple choice questions, right? So this is a great example here. This is a document review simulation, right? So it's asking you to review the draft press release and make any changes necessary to ensure it's accurate, consistent with the excerpts from the quarterly financial statements and related notes. What are they asking you to do? And then what do you have to do, right? And there's a number of tasks that you're going to have to do within. So very quickly, being familiar with the types of simulations is important, and understanding very quickly what you're being asked to do. The other thing which I want to hit on this, which is really important, is, excuse me, as you're studying and you're learning the content, right? And so you're learning the concepts, you're also learning how to answer the questions and do the simulations quickly. Make sure that you understand the variety of definitions related to exhibits. So this is a really good one, right, in financial, where there's a number of things up here: consolidated statements of operation, consolidated balance sheets, consolidated statement of cash flows. It's really important when you hear those terms to be able to visualize what that is, right? Your mind should sort of give you a snapshot of what does that mean? What is a consolidated statement of cash flows? Because that's going to allow you then, as you're being asked to do the tasks throughout the simulation, to understand which of the exhibits you need and which ones you don't. The examiners are really good sometimes about putting in extra exhibits that you don't necessarily need. And I'm sure those of you who've already taken, one or more parts of this exam can relate to. So make sure you understand the meaning, and then it'll be easier for you to save the valuable time understanding what you need to do and quickly getting to the tasks. Okay, so a couple other things that I want to hit on, and then we're going to get to some Q&A. This is really important, and I can't overstate how important this is. As you get through towards your exam date and you're pushing through that, and if you're a Surgent student, you know that the software is constantly recalculating, right? And it's telling you, how much more you need to do to get your ready scores up to 80 and above. But regardless of how you're studying, what you do towards the close finishing strong is really, really important, because you can do all this upfront prep work, and if you don't finish out strong, it can cost valuable points at the end. So bullet 2, don't study on your exam day or even the night before. A couple days before, be good with what you have, be confident, you know, and go in to the exam. What you know at that point is what you know, and go in, and like I said, and be confident. And, you know, this is not something that you can cram for, right? So sitting up the night before, you know, the morning of, that's only going to just hurt the matter. But the other thing, which is really important, is you have to do a practice exam. So we recommend to people that you do one really good practice exam, 2 if you so inclined, but 1 for sure, at least a week before your exam date. And the reason why you want to do this is, a lot of times what happens is students get busy and they go through the study process, and they're studying for an hour here or an hour and a half there, multiple choice questions, some simulations, but they haven't actually gone through the physical task and the mental task of sitting for 4 continuous hours and simulating what that's like and what they're going to be up against. So the worst possible thing that can happen is you study, you get prepared, and then you get to the exam site. And I've heard this a number of times. That was the first time I'd sat for 4 hours in one setting, and I was exhausted halfway through. So as you're studying, right, and as you're building up the content, we talked about the mental aspect, there's a physical aspect of it too, right? You want to start building up the time that you can sit in one session or one sitting and still be proficient all the way through. If there's any sports fans out there, eventually we'll have sports back, I think. If you're a football fan, they talk about, right, in the beginning, it's easy to be fresh in the beginning, but can you still be fresh at the end of a game? It's the same exact thing as you're preparing for the exam. So make sure and take that into consideration. Also make sure, and this is really critical, I think this goes without saying for this particular presentation, if you are trying to do this in 6 months, you need to pick your dates. And again, understanding there's a little bit of leeway still with per metric, but once you get your dates, don't reschedule those unless you have to. I mentioned a couple things like the 18-month window, right, and running out of time. This one is big too. Yeah, when it comes to derailing people. People are like, I got a little bit off my study schedule. I'm not quite sure I'm ready. You know what? Maybe I can just reschedule. And once you do it, I'm telling you, once you reschedule your exam, it's super easy then to reschedule it again and again and again. And again, that it happens. And so try and avoid it altogether by just, when you have your date, pick it and stick to it. Understanding that there's exceptions for everything, right? But those exceptions should be, there should be one-offs, and they're, one-offs, or, it's an insurance policy or whatever the cliches we use, right, to discuss it. Your mental focus should be, I'm going to pick my date and stick with it at all costs, right? Okay, and then finally, and this is probably, not probably, it is really important, is make sure that you don't go through all this work and then end up messing it up once you finally do get to per metric. So for fun, if you want to, you can Google, it's kind of interesting. Go ahead and Google at the end of this when you have free time, the top 10 mistakes CPA exam candidates make. You could probably make a list of them and think of the most obvious things that you could think of to not do, and I guarantee you those are going to be what the top 10 are. It's people forget to bring their government ID with a photo, or they forget to bring their NTS, so they bring the wrong NTS, or they go to the wrong prometric testing center, or they were late due to traffic. Or it's super simple things, but don't overlook them and take nothing for granted, right? I always tell people, look, you've worked so hard to get through, your 4-year or 5 years of school. You've worked so hard to get into your professional career, wherever you may be in the process, right? And then you've worked so hard to study and get ready for this. Make sure, as obvious as it sounds, make sure that you are not taking anything for granted to get through this, so that everything matches up time management wise. All right, so as it relates to Surgent, and if some of you are with us, are already Surgent students, you'll know this, but for those of you who are new to the process, I just want to spend like 2 minutes on this, and then I'm going to like I said, give you my contact information at the end. The one thing that is really important, which if you notice we kind of hit on it throughout, was, and I was sort of talking from a surgeon perspective, is exam readiness, right? And so one of the things that's really important to know is, am I ready to take the exam? And so one of the things that we've done at Surgent, in addition to the award-winning adaptive technology, in terms of really, focusing people in on what they need to know versus, what they need to know versus what they already know, which cuts down study time, is we've come up with, it's proprietary to our algorithms, and it's a ready score. So what happens is, as you're going through and studying, you see these dials out here, right? And they're constantly changing and updating based on your last study sessions, the level of difficulty of the questions, etc. And they're giving you an up-to-date ready score. You get one for your multiple choice questions, one's for your simulations, and you get them for every single topic, and then also every subtopic. So why is this important? It's important because as you're studying, you need to know if you're exam ready. That's a big thing that derails people, and part of why candidates spend time going, oh, maybe I should reschedule because I just don't know. With this software, with the Surgent software, if you're ready to take the exam or not. Because if you get all those dials to 80 and above, the data suggests then that you have a really, really good chance, high 90s probability of passing the exam. So that's an important thing to know as it is for exam effectiveness. And then the other thing to know is, one of the other things that Surgent does really well is we've built in a lot of fail-safes to make sure that people don't memorize the answers. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times what you'll see is when you get a hold of some review course software, it's like you see a question and it's like, okay, the answer is B. And like, oh, I missed it this time, but I looked at it and I see the answer again, or excuse me, I see the question again. I'm like, oh, I've seen this question before, it's B. That's an easy habit to get into, especially on the more lightly tested topics where you're not going to see, hundreds of questions on a lightly tested topic. So sometimes you're going to see the same questions. So what Surgent does is, and those of your students know this, is if I get a question and the answer is, and I have 4 choices, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I pick the second choice or B, when I get to the answer screen, if it was B on the first screen, it's not going to be B on the second screen. It's going to be A, C, or D. That constantly changes, and that really helps to make sure that you know the material. Because if you don't know the material, right, and you're guessing and you kind of think you do, then everything else is kind of it's kind of for naught, right? So understanding the CPA exam readiness, understanding how the adaptive technology helps, and the other fail safes that we build in to make sure that people don't memorize, but they're actually learning the content, are really important. So I will pause there for now. That was, again, a lot of information. I'm going to take a breath. I really appreciate your time. This is my contact information. This is my email and phone number. If you are a current Surgent student and you have any questions on the materials saw here, time management, how to, better get the most out of your course, anything like that, please feel free to contact me after the webinar, and I'll be glad to answer your question or find some time to discuss with you. If you are a candidate who's already with another course and you're interested in maybe finding out where you stand on particular exam readiness, let me know. We have a product called ReadyPass, which is valuable for anybody that's at any point of the exam process, regardless of course. It's an assessment. It'll give you a diagnostic report and tell you where your areas of strength and weaknesses are, and it's very, very helpful. So there's my contact information. I'm going to just stop now, and I will hold for any questions from the group. Okay, so I know I've given this presentation a lot, but there's got to be somebody. It can't be that good. Somebody has to have a question, right? Question, do you issue books for individual courses? So if you're just taking the, if you're just buying the, if you're just buying per part, so that just comes with the electronic books, is how that works. So if you're asking for a physical textbook, no, but there's always arrangements that we can make if you do need a physical textbook for one individual part. Rachel says, can you explain the notice to schedule? Yeah, so that's, so once you are, once your experience has been verified, right, and you're eligible to take the exam, right? So your transcripts have been sent, you created your online course, et cetera, and you get what's called the authorization to test. That's an ATT. That means that you're scheduled, that you can take the test. So then what you're doing is a notice to schedule comes through NASBA, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, and that notice to schedule is valid for a particular amount of time, and within that amount of time it's valid for is what allows you to schedule your test at Prometric. So most states, and again, this is important, it varies from state to state, but most states, the notices to schedule of the NTSs are valid for 6 months. In some states like California, they're valid for 9 months. In some states like Texas, they're only valid for 3 months. So why that's important to know is because that works into how you schedule your exam, right? So your notice to schedule, depending upon which state you live in, that's your ticket. You paid for the exam sections, and that's your ticket then to go to Prometric and schedule your exam, but you have to do it within the time allotment of when it's valid. Another question is the course suitable for professionals who have passed college a long time ago? That's a great question, and I'll be happy to take that off. That's a longer discussion offline. I'll be happy to do that. The answer is yes, but you really have to sit down and reflect on what kind of student you are, because you can, here's the thing, this course is designed to get people through the process as quickly as possible, but you can study in a linear fashion, right? Which is going through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, if that's how you study best. So typically most people will do it in the adaptive format, but if you've been out of school for a while and you feel like you need a, what we call a much more expansive refresher course, you absolutely can do that. And then what we do is we work with you on that basis to properly schedule your exams if you're going in a linear fashion, okay? And if you want more information about that, please just reach out to me afterwards, and I'll be happy to answer that for you. Okay, thank you for the question. Please go over the part where you were discussing taking the exams between August and December. Okay, so let me just go back real quick. I'm going to pull up the calendar again. Okay, so if you're going to do this in 6 months, again, what you're going to try and do is you're trying to allot yourself enough time to study, right, between exam parts and then going into the next part, right? And so, for instance, typically what we tell people is, let's look at this example from July to December. So what I would tell people here is, and let's just use today, like today is the starting point. So if I'm eligible and qualified to take the exam, right, in the particular state, and I know I'm good on my transcripts and everything like that, then I'm going to figure out what my target exam dates are, and then I'm going to back it up from there in terms of how much time I'm going to allot to study, right? Now, if you're with the Surgent course and you're using the adaptive technology, you're going to get through this. That's the great thing, is you're going to get through this really quickly, right? In financial, the average amount of hours that people are spending is 76 hours, and it's less than the other parts, right? So think about that, but even think, let's say 90 hours, right? And then how much time can you study per week and per day, and then you're going to schedule out your exam accordingly. So I would tell people, if I was starting today, I'd be looking to take my first section the end of July. I'd be looking, or the first week of August, 4 to 5 weeks. I'd be looking to take my next section, audit, probably the first week of September, second week. The third part, regulation, I'd be probably looking to take that in mid to late October. And then I would probably look to be taking the last part in the middle towards the end of December. That is a lot of time within, especially with the continuous testing now, because there's no blackout periods. That gives you a lot of time really to properly, schedule it out. Amount of study time. It allows you to be flexible with your study schedules, and it doesn't push you to the wall like it otherwise might have, right? So again, one of the things, remember, we talked about was sort of that mental welfare along the way, and making sure you have time, you take a day off, etc. That schedule combined with the year-round testing allows you to do that in 6 months. And then, Job, you said, do you have specific content tailored for the simulation section? So if you're talking about, within the course, and we spend a tremendous amount of time on simulations, so that you're well versed in each type of simulation that there is, and also, the various types of simulation per the different content type throughout. The other thing too, which I encourage you to do, is if you go to our website, we have some recorded webinars where we actually go through how to solve a simulation in financial, how to do a simulation in audit, how to do a written communication. Those are all on our website, and you might enjoy looking at one of those. So the answer is yes, extensively. And then if you're also looking at how to really sort of, take the 2-minute example I gave you and break it down over 30 minutes and dive into it, you're more than welcome to check one of those out as well. So thank you for that question. Okay, and we have another question that says, hi, I will be a senior this coming fall and was wondering if I should plan to take all parts right after graduation in May. Also, do you recommend the 6-month strategy, or should we take more time? Okay, so again, let me just give you a little bit of context on that, because that's a great question, right? The 6th month, how, can I do it in 6 months? That comes from people who are specifically looking to, maybe they're starting an internship and they have some time on their hands between the internship and when they start full time, or maybe you live in a state where, you can take the exam after 120 hours, and then the other 30 is just related to your licensure. You're trying to get through it as quickly as possible. So what I recommend doing is, I recommend actually taking a look and seeing how you feel as you get towards the end of your graduation in May. That's really, really important. How am I mentally feeling? And then also you need to take into consideration, what's my job outlook? Am I starting a new job, and when am I starting it? How many hours a week am I going to be working along with being able to study? And then also, it's the third thing, we didn't really talk a lot about this, but you also have to take sort of a temperature about what's going on in your life. What are your life events over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months? Here's what normally I recommend to people. I recommend that you do this over 8 months. 8 months, especially now with the year-round testing, is absolutely a doable amount of time, and it also gives you that sort of that buttress up against the 18-month window, right? That's more than enough time to allow for all of the things that that may come into play, right? Life events, work, etc., changing. But however, I will say this, that now that the year-round testing is play, 6 months is far more doable based on an analysis of the criteria that I gave you. So the answer to your question is absolutely, you want to start as soon as you are eligible to take the exam. That doesn't matter if you're doing it in 5 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. As soon as you're eligible, take the exam, especially out of college, because the statistics show that the pass rates are highest the closest you are to your college career, which means what? In theory, you're going to probably have to study a little bit less than if you're a year or 2 out or 3 years out, because you have it fresh in your mind. So definitely do that. As far as how to schedule over what period of time, I think that's a self-analysis based on the criteria listed, and I think at that time you'll have a pretty good idea. But anywhere from 6 to 8 months is a really good target to take. Okay, and you're welcome. And then Sophia, you came back with 8 months for full-time workers, just trying to get an idea of what's a good amount of time to study in a week. And again, that is absolutely, it's the number one question, right? And while I can give you some guidance on it, a lot of it has to do with all the criteria that we mentioned in the beginning, right? Which is how effective is your study time? How much time do you really, how much time can you allot? So what I would recommend doing is if you're with Surgent, right? One of the things that you'll do is you'll take the assessment ahead of time at the very beginning of the course, and you'll plug in your targeted exam dates, and that will show you, that backs, so what the software does is it backs then out based on which days you tell you can study, and when your exam date is, it will tell you how many hours you're going to have to study per week. It varies too, right? Because everybody has a different level of aptitude depending upon the subject or the specific subtopic in the area. This is probably the simplest way I can tell people is you want to pretend that you're preparing for the CPA exam is a part-time job. And if it's a part-time job, you would give it the level of importance that you would, and you'd spend probably 20 to 25 hours a week. That's a good amount to allot. So if you're working full-time, sure, you can do that, right? That's 3 or 4 nights a week for 2 to 3 hours each, and then a full chunk on the weekend. But it is like working a full-time job. But here's the thing: if you're going to do it over 8 months and you're allotting that amount of time, right? What's going to happen is there's going to be times when you're going to get through things quicker because your aptitude is going to be good. You're going to learn it. You're going to know it. You're going to spend less time on it than you might otherwise would. And so that's going to give you some of that study time back. So if you want to talk offline, Sophia, I'm more than happy to go through sort of a detailed study plan, and I can show you what the assessment looks like, and I'm more than happy to help you with that. And you're very welcome. And yes, one more question. Can you please go over what happens when we do not pass a section? Do you need to reschedule and pass within 18 months of the cycle that already started? So keeping the calendar up here, this is the easiest way to look at it. So just for simple purposes, let's use this, right? So in this example, let's say that the first exam date, I'm going to be super simple here. The first exam date is July 1st. Let's say that's when I take FAR. And then let's say for the next part audit, let's say I take that on September 30th, okay? So July 1st, September 30th. So in this example, if I pass financial on July 1st, then I have 18 months from that date, which would be what, December 31st, to pass the other 3 sections, okay? If I don't get the other 3 sections passed by December 31st, I lose credit for the first part that I passed, financial, and then it's a rolling 18-month window. So it rolls to the date of the next part that I passed, and the 18-month goes from there. So if you can just sort of extend it out in your mind, I don't have a 2022 calendar, but if we're at December 31st over here, 2021, I didn't pass, let's say I didn't pass BEC, and now I lost credit for FAR. So then it's going to roll to, remember we said September 30th. So now the 18-month window is going to roll to September 30th, which is going to do what? That's going to put us at the end of March 2022, right? But we're already here in December. So do you see how that, you see how that works, and why it's such a, not only is it's just a psychological, it just really can derail people, because now you've lost credit for a section you passed. You have that component to deal with. You have to take it again. Plus you're still trying to pass the 4th section, whatever that is that you didn't get past, and you now have a 3-month window to do it, right? So all these things sort of play in to, again, just the actual manner of testing and getting it done. But again, that psychological component of, God, I got through it once, and now I have to do it again. So that's why I spent, we spent the time on the 18-month window. Again, make sure you're so aware of that 18-month window. And again, we have now, it's year-round testing, so there's that extra time, right? That extra 120 days per year, or 100, or 120 days per 18 months, right? But don't let that fool you. That time can slip up on you. So make sure and pay close attention to that. Okay. Well, listen, we're right at the top of the hour. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I really hope that you found this valuable and that wherever you are in the process, I definitely think there's a takeaway. So again, I'm going to just put up my contact information here at the end. It's weesp@surgent.com. It's my phone number, 213-605-5981. We will send out the recording and the slides afterwards. And again, if you have any additional questions, by all means, please reach out to me. And best of luck on your journey, everybody, and have a fabulous evening wherever you are, and stay safe. Thank you and good night.